Andre backed the van up almost flush with the porch steps, and Burin leaped out before anyone else, shoved his nose into the ground, spun in circles, barked at his own shadow, and tore off along the fence, trailing the smell of the road and strange places behind him. "Burin, come!" Dasha called, but the dog had already vanished around the corner of the house. Marina stood in the middle of the yard and looked at the house. 2 stories, brick, with pale yellow window trim and a creaking front porch. Not pretty, but solid. The landlord had said it was built in the 80s, then remodeled later. You could feel it. The second floor was slightly lighter than the first, as if it had been added by different hands at a different time. The balcony faced the side of the house, wide, with wooden railings gone dark from years of rain. "It'll do," said Andre, leaning against the hood and working the kinks out of his back. "People have lived in worse." "You say that about every place we've ever rented," Marina said. "And I'm always right." Leosha was already hauling boxes out of the back with the expression of someone doing a favor under protest, but really he was curious. New city, new yard, and this house with an attic he hadn't gotten into yet. 12 years old is an age when a move isn't just stressful, it's also an adventure, if you look at it the right way. The city was called Krasnopolsk. Not big and not small. The kind of place that has everything you need and nothing extra. Andre had been transferred for work, offered a good position. Turning it down would have been stupid. They'd rented the house for a year with an option to extend. Marina had gone fully remote. Dasha had cried for 3 days about her friends, then settled down. Burin had taken the whole thing philosophically. The yard was enclosed by a wooden fence, gray, rotting a little at the base, but standing straight. To the right, past the fence, began the neighbor's lot. Old apple trees grew there, thick and untended, their branches hanging over the boards like gnarled gray arms. Behind the trees, a house was visible, dark, low-slung, with small windows. Marina was looking at those apple trees when she saw the woman. The old woman stood on the far side of the fence, still, as if she'd been standing there for a while, small and dry, wearing a dark house dress despite the August heat. White hair pulled back, hands folded in front of her. She was watching Marina. Not the yard, not the van, not the children, Marina specifically, directly and without embarrassment, the way you look at something that has turned up where it doesn't belong. Marina lifted her hand in a wave without quite meaning to. The old woman didn't respond, just watched. Marina looked away, found Andre with her eyes, started to say something like, "The neighbor's right there. Maybe we should go say hello." But then a sound came from the direction of the fence. Burin. The dog was sitting 2 feet from the slats and howling, quietly, almost under his breath, nothing like his usual loud bark. His tail was down. His ears were flat. He was staring in the same direction as the old woman, at nothing, or at some point only the 2 of them could see. "Burin, knock it off," Andre said. "What's gotten into him?" "He's tired from the drive," Marina said. She glanced at the fence one more time. The old woman was gone. just the apple trees, just the dark branches, just the quiet August yard smelling of dust and other people's earth. "Let's get the boxes in," Marina said. "Leosha, stop dragging that one on the ground." The house took them in without a creak, without surprises. It smelled of plaster and other people's lives, like every rental. By nightfall, they had the essentials in place. Dasha fell asleep still in her clothes. Andrei went out on the balcony for a cigarette and looked down at the dark neighbor's lot. It was quiet over there, just the apple trees. He finished his cigarette and went to bed. Buran lay beside the bed and did not sleep. For the first 3 days, Grandma Stacia was just background noise. She flickered past the fence. Dark house dress moving through the apple trees, slow progress across the yard, sometimes her voice, muttering to herself while she worked around the garden beds. Marina watched her from the kitchen window and kept catching herself looking longer than she needed to. Something about the old woman was off, in a small way. Not frightening, just uncomfortable. Like a splinter you can't see but can feel. Andrei said, "Elderly woman, lives alone, personality is the least of our problems. Best to just leave her be." Leaving her be didn't work out on the 4th day. Leosha and Dasha were kicking a soccer ball around the yard after lunch. Buran raced between them, trying to get to the ball first and always just missing. Dasha shanked a kick. The ball sailed over the fence and landed with a dull thud in the neighbor's yard, somewhere in the grass under the apple trees. "I'll climb over," Leosha said. "Better use the gate," said Dasha. Leosha went through the gate, walked around by the street, pushed open the neighbor's gate, which turned out to be unlocked, stepped into the yard. The ball was easy to spot, 3 feet from the entrance, right at the edge of a garden bed. He didn't make it that far. Grandma Stacia came around the corner of the house so quietly that Leosha didn't hear her footsteps. She was just suddenly there, between him and the ball, standing and looking down at him, even though she was a full head shorter. That trick he couldn't explain for a long time afterward. "Hi," he said. "The ball landed here. Can I grab it?" She said nothing, looked at him, not with anger, not with surprise, with nothing. The way a person looks at a cockroach and decides whether it's worth the effort. Then she bent down slowly, picked up the ball, held it in her hands for a moment, as if weighing it, handed it to Leosha. Didn't say a word. Leosha mumbled thanks and left quickly, though he walked rather than ran. An important distinction when you're 12 and you have your pride. "So?" Dasha asked. "Fine," Leosha said. "She's weird." At that moment, Buran, whom no one had thought to hold back, ran up to the fence on their side and erupted into such furious barking that Marina leaned out the window. The dog stood at the slats, hackles raised, going absolutely berserk. Frantic, rageful, nothing like the way he barked at cats or cyclists. On the other side of the fence, Grandma Stacia was walking toward her house, back turned, not looking around. Buran cut off mid-bark, sat down, and let out a soft, pitiful whimper. "Buran inside," Marina called. The dog obeyed immediately. The story got a follow-up that same evening when Andrei discovered that the fence post, the exact one Buran had been barking at, had been thoroughly marked. The dog had apparently decided to establish the boundary with complete canine directness. "Burn, you idiot," Andre said without any real heat. He didn't think about it again for more than 5 minutes. Grandma Stisha, it seemed, thought about it longer, because the next morning, when Marina came outside to hang laundry, she found the old woman standing at their shared fence. She was looking at the house, methodically, corner by corner, from the front porch to the balcony, from the balcony to the chimney. Her lips were moving slightly. Her hands were folded in front of her, fingers laced together. And Marina noticed the fingers were moving, slowly, as though she was counting something off, or working through an invisible set of prayer beads. Marina stopped with a wet sheet in her hands. The old woman turned her head and looked at her. Didn't lower her hands, didn't stop moving her lips. Just looked. Marina hung the sheet, went back inside, and closed the door. Her heart was beating harder than it should have been. At dinner, she didn't mention it. She didn't want it said out loud, and she wasn't sure yet why. Buran barely touched his food, left half the bowl. Dasha found the first one. Saturday morning, she ran out onto the porch in just her socks, going after the ball she'd left in the yard the night before. Almost stepped on it, stopped, looked down, and called out, "Mom, there's something here." Marina came out. Right on the threshold, pressed against the right side of the door frame, lay a small bundle. A rag, dark, worn thin from washing, tied with coarse thread in 3 knots. Something hard and angular was visible through the cloth. It smelled of earth and something else. Swedish, wrong, the way old country sheds smell when no one has cleaned them in years. "Don't touch it," Marina told Dasha. "Go inside." "What is it?" "Go inside," I said. Andre came out, looked at it, shrugged. He picked the bundle up through a plastic bag so as not to touch it with his hands, and tossed it in the trash can by the gate. Said, "Who knows who left it? Probably kids messing around. Strange city, these things happen." Marina didn't argue. But she spent the rest of the day with the feeling that the house had gotten slightly darker. Not in the sense of light, but in some other sense, one she didn't have a word for. The second bundle showed up 2 days later, this time at the back door, the one off the kitchen that led to the garden. They hardly ever used that door. Andre noticed it by chance, stepping out for a cigarette. This bundle was different, smaller, flat, wrapped in newspaper and tied with red thread. Inside, when Andre unwrapped it out of curiosity, were 3 chicken feet, dried out, 3 of them, and a handful of coarse salt mixed with something dark that looked like graveyard dirt, though he caught himself on that thought and pushed it away. "Throw it out," Marina said. Her voice was even. "Already did." They didn't talk about Grandma Stasha. Her name seemed to resist being said aloud. It hovered nearby, but they both steered around it. Marina knew this was strange, but she couldn't make herself stop. Then the small things started. First, sleep. Marina had always slept well, fallen asleep quickly, woken up rested. Now she lay in the dark, with her eyes open, listening to the house. Creaks she hadn't noticed before. Sounds from behind the wall. Buran shifting around at the foot of the bed, sometimes growling softly, not awake in his sleep at something of his own. Andre became irritable. Not badly, not explosively. Just a short fuse appeared where there hadn't been one before. He snapped at small things. Twice he raised his voice at Lyosha over nothing, then seemed surprised at himself afterward. At dinner, he sat in silence, staring at his plate. Dasha started coming to her parents' bed at night. She said she was having bad dreams. She wouldn't say what kind, just shook her head and pressed herself against Marina. Buran stopped eating properly. By evening, the bowl was still half full. The dog lay in the corner of the kitchen with his head on his paws, watching the door. Not the front door, but the one that led to the hallway, as if he was waiting for someone to come through it. On the 9th day, Marina found the third planting. This one was the worst. It wasn't by a door. It was inside the threshold, under the entry rug. Marina found it by accident when the rug slid sideways and she went to straighten it. She bent down and saw, right on the floorboards, at the very threshold, 3 needles laid out in a cross, bound with black thread. Next to them, a piece of wax, clearly from a candle, pressed down into the gap between the floorboards. Marina crouched there and stared at it for a long time. Then she stood up, took a dustpan and brush, swept everything up carefully without touching it with her bare hands. Went outside, burned it in a tin bucket. Came back in, washed her hands up to the elbows. Sat down at the table and said to Andre, who was drinking tea and looking at his phone, "We need to talk to someone in the neighborhood. Someone who's been here a long time." Andre looked up. About Grandma Stesha? So he'd known all along. They'd both known. They'd just been pretending otherwise until now. "Yes," Marina said, "about her." Marina woke up at 2:47, not from a sound, from the silence. It was so dense and unnatural that she opened her eyes before she'd even registered she'd been asleep. Andre was breathing steadily beside her. Dasha had stayed in her own room tonight. Buran wasn't whimpering. There was nothing at all. That was exactly what was wrong. Marina lay there looking at the ceiling. Her heart was beating slightly faster than normal. Not from fear, more from that feeling when your body knows something before your mind does. She rolled onto her side, closed her eyes, lay there for a minute, 2. Then she got up. She couldn't have explained why. Her feet just found the floor and she walked, not toward the bathroom, not toward the kitchen, but toward the balcony door. It was closed, the sheer curtain motionless. Marina took hold of the handle and pulled. The night was warm and still. August was in its final days, the air still holding the day's heat. The moon, nearly full, hung high, and the yard was clearly visible, too clearly. Grandma Stesha was standing at their fence. Marina saw her immediately, a dark figure at the slats, a few feet from the corner, right where Buran had marked the post. The old woman was dressed in something long and dark, not her house dress, something different, more like a floor-length skirt with a shawl pulled over her shoulders despite the warmth. In one hand a candle. The flame burned steady, though the air wasn't entirely still, or maybe it was. Marina couldn't tell. The old woman was whispering. The words were inaudible, just the movement of her lips, rhythmic, almost monotone, like a prayer or a count. Her free hand moved along the fence, slowly, with pauses. It was holding something. Marina squinted. A knife. Not large, something like a kitchen knife with a dark handle. Grandma Stacia was drawing it along the slats, touching each board, lightly, almost tenderly. Sometimes she stopped and made movements in the air in front of her, short strokes, one cross after another. She was crossing their house. Slowly, methodically, like a person doing a job. Marina stood on the balcony and couldn't move, not from fear, or not only from fear. Something in the scene was so assured, so proprietary, that her body simply couldn't find a response to it. The old woman wasn't hiding. She wasn't looking around. She wasn't hurrying. She had every right to be doing this. That was what her whole posture said, every unhurried movement. This was her ritual, her territory, her business. Then Grandma Stacia stopped, raised her head, and looked directly at the balcony. Marina didn't step back, or didn't want to. Something held her in place. They looked at each other across the dark yard, across the moonlight, across a few yards of August air. The old woman's face was calm, no embarrassment, no alarm at being caught. Just that gaze, steady, appraising, the same as the very first day. Then she lowered her head and went on, as if Marina were a lamppost, just an object in the night, as if her presence changed absolutely nothing. Marina went back inside, closed the balcony door, sat on the edge of the bed. Andre hadn't woken up. She looked at his sleeping face and thought about how she should wake him. Should go out there, say something, call the police. Though what would she tell them? An elderly woman standing at the fence with a candle, whispering, the knife, a knife at the fence in the middle of the night. That was something that could actually be put into words. But she didn't wake him. She lay down, pulled the blanket up to her chin. She lay there looking at the ceiling, listening to the silence beyond the balcony door, waiting, for she didn't know what. Just before 4, Burin rose from his spot, walked to the balcony door, and sat down in front of it. He sat there for about 3 minutes. Then he went back to his place and lay down. So she had gone. Marina closed her eyes. 2 hours left until the alarm. She didn't sleep for a single minute of them. Andre went to see old Nikolai on Sunday after lunch. Marina had told him everything that morning, about the knife, the candle, about how the old woman had looked up at the balcony and never once lowered her hands. She told it evenly, without drama, the way you list facts. Andre listened without speaking, and Marina watched the tension gather along his jaw. The particular tension that meant he was angry, but holding it in for now. "Why didn't you wake me?" he asked when she finished. "I don't know," she said honestly. He sat there a moment, turning his mug in his hands. "I'm going to talk to Nikolai." Nikolai Semyonovich lived across the street and one house down, in a place with green shutters and a tidy kitchen garden where everything grew in straight rows, as if measured with a ruler. He was the kind of man who spends his whole life in one place and knows everything about it, not out of curiosity, but simply because that's how it is. Andrei had seen him in his yard a couple of times. They'd nodded to each other across the street. Nikolai Semyonovich opened the gate, looked at Andrei, and stepped aside without a word. "Come in. I've just put the kettle on." They sat on the porch. The old man drank his tea from the saucer, the old-fashioned way, and watched Andrei with the calm attention of a man who has long since stopped being surprised by anything and sees no point in being rushed. Andrei told him about the plantings, the night ritual, the knife along the fence slats, about his wife not sleeping, about Burin going off his food. Nikolai Semyonovich listened without interrupting. When Andrei finished, the old man set his saucer on the table, looked off to one side, toward where the dark shape of the neighbor's house was visible beyond the garden plots. "How long have you been renting?" "6 weeks." The old man nodded. "Before you, a family lived there. Young couple, 2 kids, same as you. Came in March, moved out in September. The younger child got sick for a long time. Nothing they could put a name to. Doctors kept shrugging. Once they left, the child recovered." Andrei said nothing. Before them, a man, also there for work, on his own. He lasted 6 months. Then he started drinking, lost his job, moved on somewhere. The old man paused. "The landlord doesn't mention any of this. You understand." "I understand," Andrei said. "And how long has she been like this?" Nikolai Semyonovich looked up. "Stasia?" He said the name without inflection, the way you say the name of an illness. 40 years, maybe more. I moved here in '86. She was already like this by then. Her husband died. They say it was his own fault. He drank hard. But she didn't see it that way. No children. She was left alone with her own. With her own? Meaning what? The old man was quiet for a moment. Her own business. She always took it seriously. Not village nonsense, you understand. Not herbs, not charms for a toothache. Something else. Where she learned it, I don't know. They say her mother was the same, and her grandmother. Passed down through the women. Do the locals know? The locals know, Nikolai Semyonovich said simply. The locals give her a wide berth. Our neighborhood cop, Pashka Rogov, went to see her twice on complaints. Both times he came back and said everything was fine, no violations. After the second time, his wife broke her arm out of nowhere. He doesn't go anymore. Andrei sat looking at his hands. So we should just move out then. The old man didn't answer right away. Picked up his saucer, held it. You could move out, he said at last. But if I were you, I'd go see someone first. Who? There's a man. Nikolai Semyonovich turned his hand in the air, searching for the word. Not too close by. The next region over, a village called Malya Veselki. From there you go on foot into the forest. There's an old man who lives out there. They call him Kuzmich. I don't know his last name. Maybe he doesn't have one. Hunters run into him sometimes, fishermen. He's been there a long time. And what does he do? The old man looked at Andrei. He understands these things. He's not a fraud. I can tell you that for certain. I went to him myself a long time ago, for my own reasons. He helped. A pause. Just helped. And that was that. Andrei nodded. He stood up. How do I find this village? Nikolai Semyonovich got up too, went into the house, and came back with a sheet of notebook paper on which a small hand-drawn map was already sketched out. As if he'd known this question would come sooner or later. From Veselki, take the dirt road to the pine grove. There's a path that goes right. About 7 kilometers. Take your time, you won't get lost. Andrei took the paper. Thank you, Nikolai Semyonovich. The old man stood at the gate and watched him go. When Andrei was already halfway down the street, the old man spoke, not loudly but clearly enough to carry. Don't pick up the plantings with your bare hands, and don't throw them out on your property. Burn them outside the fence line. Andrei turned around. Nikolai Semyonovich was already closing the gate. They left Saturday morning. The kids they left with a neighbor 2 houses down, an older woman named Valentina Ivanovna, who kept cats and baked pies and whom Marina had trusted instinctively from the first time they met. Burin stayed with them too. Dasha was happy about it, and the dog took the situation philosophically. They drove in silence for the first half hour. Andrei drove. Marina looked out the window. The forest along the roadside grew thicker, pines giving way to mixed growth, then pines again, older and darker. The sky was pale and overcast, and the light lay flat and shadowless, the kind of light you get at the end of summer just before the weather turns. Malya Veselki turned out to be a village of 12 houses, half of which had clearly been empty for years. A dirt road ran into the forest from the last yard, 2 ruts in the grass, nearly overgrown. Andrei pulled onto the shoulder and killed the engine. On foot from here, he said. The path was where Nikolai Semyonovich had promised, in the pine grove, to the right of the road, faintly worn. They walked without talking. The forest was quiet, already autumnal, even though fall hadn't officially started. Moss gave underfoot, and the air smelled of pine resin and damp. Somewhere high above, a woodpecker worked steadily, unhurried. Marina had expected to walk and think about Grandma Stasia, about the plantings, about the knife along the fence slats. But she didn't. The forest somehow took all of that, didn't solve it, just held it for a while. She walked and breathed, and for now that was enough. They nearly missed the cabin. It stood off to one side of the path between 2 old pines, and was the same color as the bark, gray-brown, weathered dark, sunken into the earth right down to its foundation. Small, no garden, no outbuildings, just a woodpile against the wall, neatly stacked and clearly recent, and a thread of smoke rising straight from the chimney. Andrei stopped. Should I knock? Knock, Marina said. He didn't get the chance. The door opened on its own. An old man stood in the doorway. Kuzmich was short and lean, in a plain linen shirt and dark trousers tucked into boots. No beard, just stubble, gray. His hair was gray too, cut short. No props, no amulets around his neck, no special clothing. If Marina had passed him on a street in the city, she'd have taken him for a retired engineer, someone with a dacha. But his eyes were different. Not frightening. Just deep, somehow. He looked at them as if he were seeing not their faces, but something behind their faces, and he did it without effort, the way you look at something familiar. "Come in," he said. His voice was ordinary, quiet. Inside smelled of pine needles, wood smoke, and dried herbs. Herbs hung from the ceiling everywhere, bundles, clusters, wreaths, half of which Marina couldn't have named. A table, 2 benches, a stove. On the windowsill, a few small objects that Marina didn't look at closely. Kuzmich sat down across from them and folded his hands on the table. He looked at them calmly, without hurry. "Tell me." Andre did the talking. Marina filled in details. The night, the balcony, the look the old woman hadn't looked away from. Kuzmich listened without interrupting. He didn't nod once, didn't ask a single question. Just listened, the way you listen to something you already know, checking the particulars. When they finished, he was quiet for a moment, 30 seconds at least. Then he said, "She's old. She's been at it a long time." "Is that bad?" Andre asked. "It means she knows what she's doing, but..." He paused briefly. "She has a great deal of anger, and a small root. Do you understand the difference?" They didn't entirely, but they both nodded. "Anger is fuel," Kuzmich said plainly. "Plenty of fuel, but a small boiler. She won't get far, but while she's moving, it's unpleasant." He got up and went to the shelf, sorted through things for a while, unhurried. Came back and set something on the table. Marina didn't immediately understand what. A small bundle of natural cloth tied with linen cord, and alongside it a small dried branch with dark berries. "Hang the charm above the front door on the inside. Don't take it down. Don't let it get wet." Then he talked for a long time, methodically, without wasted words. The thresholds, how to treat them. The corners, what to do. The plantings, how to neutralize them before burning and why that mattered. Andre listened and memorized. Marina typed notes into her phone. At the end, Kuzmich went quiet. He looked at Marina. "You were on the balcony that night," he said. "When she saw you, you didn't go inside." "No," Marina said. "That was right," he said quietly. "Going in would have been worse." He walked them to the path. He wouldn't take money. Andre tried, and the old man shook his head. He shook both their hands, a dry, firm grip, said, already turning away, "Do everything exactly. Don't rush, and don't be afraid. That matters more than anything else." They walked back through the forest, and Marina carried the bundle in her hand and thought about how the words, "Don't be afraid," coming from him, didn't sound like reassurance. They sounded like an instruction. Just another item on the list. Doable. The forest was silent. It smelled of pine resin and the approaching fall. They started Sunday morning while the kids were still asleep. Andre took the sheet of paper where Marina had written down everything from Kuzmich's instructions. Methodically, numbered, nothing left out. They both understood that doing this halfway or approximately was pointless. Either exactly right or not at all. First, in the plantings, Andre went around the full perimeter of the house with gardening gloves and an old trowel. He found 2 they hadn't known about. One at the drain pipe on the north side, the other buried shallow at the corner of the foundation, wrapped in foil. Marina followed behind, holding the tin bucket. They picked everything up only through the gloves, without unwrapping, without looking inside. Kuzmich had explained why. To look was to make contact, and contact was exactly what they didn't need. They burned it all outside the gate on the vacant lot across the street. Andre doused it with lighter fluid and struck a match. The rags burned poorly, with black smoke and a smell Marina couldn't identify. Not chemicals, not rubber, something else, organic and wrong. She stood and watched until it had burned down to ash. They left the ash where it was and walked away. Then at the thresholds, Kuzmich had given the mixture verbally without letting them write it down, saying it would stay with them on its own. It did. Marina mixed everything in a small clay bowl, water, salt, a few drops of something from a small vial that had been tucked into the bundle with the charm. The smell was sharp and resinous, not unpleasant. Andre treated the thresholds, the front door, the kitchen door, all three. Unhurried, with a brush, working evenly across the wood from edge to edge. Marina did the windowsills, every single one, on both floors. The balcony door separately, carefully, tracing the full perimeter of the frame. Lyosha appeared in the doorway, rumpled with sleep. "What are you doing?" "Fixing things up," Andre said without turning around. "On a Sunday morning?" "That's right." Lyosha stood there a moment, looked, went back to bed. He wasn't convinced, but he didn't argue. Marina hung the charm herself. She stood on a step stool and tapped a small nail above the doorframe, on the inside as Kuzmich had instructed. Hung the bundle, stepped down, moved back a pace, looked at it. Small and unobtrusive. A guest wouldn't notice it. The eye wouldn't catch on it. That was exactly how it should be, the old man had said. What works doesn't announce itself. The dried branch with berries they broke into 4 pieces and placed in the corners, each corner of the entryway, tucked behind the baseboards. That was the last item on the list. Andre folded the gloves into a plastic bag, tied it shut, threw it away outside the fence. "Done?" Marina asked. "Done," he said. They stood in the entryway and said nothing. Marina waited. She didn't know for what. Some feeling, some sign that something had changed. There was nothing. Just a house, smelling of resin and, faintly, of breakfast going cold. Burin came out of the kitchen, walked to the front door, and sniffed the threshold. Stood there, came back and lay down at Marina's feet, resting his head on her slipper. "He approves," Marina said. Andre made a small sound. "That night Grandma Stisha came." Marina hadn't been sleeping. She'd been lying there waiting, though she wouldn't have admitted it out loud. She heard something shift beyond the balcony door. Not a sound, not a movement, just a change in the quality of the silence. Denser, inhabited. She got up and went out to the balcony. The old woman was standing at the fence, in the same spot as before. Candle, dark shawl, knife, everything the same. She began the same way too, lips moving, hands starting along the slats. But something was wrong. Marina could see it in the movements. They were slightly less even than before. The hand with the knife stopped earlier than usual. Grandma Stacia took a step back, as if she'd walked into something invisible, not physically, more like a person who expects an open door and finds a wall. She stood there, tried again, stopped again. She raised her head and looked at the balcony. This time there was something new in her expression. Not anger, not surprise, something more like recalculation, as if she were reassessing the situation and hadn't yet decided what to do about it. Then she turned and walked toward her house. Quickly, for the first time. Quickly, without that slow proprietary walk. Marina stood on the balcony and watched the dark figure disappear behind the apple trees. Her heart was steady. Her hands weren't shaking. In the room behind her, Burin lifted his head, looked at the balcony door, yawned, lay back down. Marina smiled, for the first time in a long while in the dark, for no one. She went back to bed, closed her eyes, and slept. The storm came in the middle of September. Marina saw it coming at lunch. The sky to the west began to darken, not gradually, but all at once, as if someone had turned a page. The clouds moved in low and heavy, with a greenish tint along their edges. The color that comes before storms that are more than just rain. Andre looked out the window and said, "This one's going to be serious." He brought the chairs in from the porch. Lyosha and Dasha came home from school at 3. By 4, the wind was bending the apple trees in the neighbor's yard. Marina watched from the kitchen window, and there was something almost solemn about it. The old trees bent but didn't break. They held. Burin went under the table and stayed there. At 4:30 it got dark the way it only gets dark in a storm. Not evening dusk, but a sudden, purposeful darkening, as if someone had turned the lights off deliberately. Marina switched on the kitchen light. Andre moved through the house, checking windows. Dasha sat with a book and pretended she wasn't listening to what was happening outside. The thunder started far away, muffled, like someone moving heavy furniture beyond the horizon. Then closer. Then right overhead, a crack with no pause, lightning and sound nearly together. The rain hit the windows all at once without warning. Marina stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the neighbor's yard. The apple trees were barely visible through the downpour. A gray wall of water, brief flashes that lit everything sharp and white for a second at a time. She wasn't thinking about anything in particular, just watching. Then she saw her. Grandma Stisha had come out into her yard. In the storm, in the downpour, into the darkness split by lightning. She was moving across her yard slowly, as always, without an umbrella, without a raincoat, a dark figure in the streaming water, almost indistinguishable unless you knew where to look, walking toward her side of the fence. Marina didn't call for Andre, she just watched. The old woman reached the fence, stopped where she always stopped. She was doing something. The details were hidden by the rain. Just a silhouette. Just the movement of hands. Just a figure standing at someone else's fence in a storm and doing her work. The lightning struck without warning. Not a series, not a scatter. One strike, precise, vertical, as if someone had drawn a line from top to bottom with absolute certainty. The flash was so total that Marina squeezed her eyes shut. White, complete, shadowless. The thunder came immediately, no pause, and hit the windows hard enough that Dasha cried out from the other room. When Marina opened her eyes, there was no one at the fence. She stood and looked out the window. The rain fell. The apple trees bent. The fence stood. "Mom?" Dasha called from the other room. "Where are you?" "Right here," Marina said. "Everything's fine." Her voice came out steady. She was surprised by that herself. Andre came into the kitchen, stood beside her, looked out the window. "That was close," he said. "Yes," Marina said, "close." They didn't speak of it again that evening. In the morning, Marina woke to voices outside. She looked out the window. People had gathered at the gate of the neighbor's yard. An ambulance, 2 people in uniform, several neighbors. Nikolai Semyonovich was there too, standing apart, holding his cap in his hands, looking at the ground. Andre went out to the porch, stood there, came back, said quietly so the children wouldn't hear. "They found Grandma Stisha this morning in her yard." Marina nodded. "Lightning?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "Yes," Andre said. They were quiet for a moment. Dasha came into the entryway, hair disheveled, pillow crease on her cheek. "What's going on out there?" "Ambulance," Andre said. "The neighbor had something happen." "The old lady next door?" "Her." Dasha looked out the window, lost interest, went to have breakfast. Lyosha came down after her, glanced out too, went to eat. For the children, a storm was a storm. An ambulance was an ambulance. In the afternoon, Marina went out to hang laundry. Burin followed her out, trotted across the yard, sniffed the corners along his usual route. Then he stopped at the fence, at that same corner where he'd always barked, where his hackles had always gone up, where he'd sat and whimpered into the ground. He stood there, sniffed the slats, calmly, matter-of-factly, the way you sniff plain wood. Just an old fence, just boards. Stood there a moment longer, and walked away. Marina watched him go, a wet sheet in her hands. The sun had come out after yesterday, quiet, September sun, without the force of summer, but real. The apple trees beyond the fence stood still. No movement, just trees. She hung the sheet, smoothed out the edges. No one celebrated out loud. No one brought it up at dinner, or the next day, or after that. Not because they were afraid of the words, just because some things don't need words. They simply happen, and you simply go on living. The house went quiet, truly quiet. Not the hollow silence that had pressed down on them these past weeks, but a normal domestic quiet. The kind where you can hear Dasha laughing at something in her room, Lyosha kicking a ball around the yard, Burin working on a bone by the front steps. Marina stood in that silence and listened to it. Good silence, theirs.